Language is power. The default language for a leader is always he. I would say empathy is a superpower and you should develop it. And the more powerful you are, the more empathetic you can be.
2 practical tips for anyone to strengthen their empathy muscle.
The skill of deep listening. When you're doing what you're doing, what are you really doing?
Welcome to An Inquiry into Empathy Quotient by Vidya Damani. This podcast is about unpacking empathy in action through talking to leaders from different walks of life. If you're someone who's ever asked yourself how you could be a more empathetic person or a leader, then this podcast is for you. Today we have with us a very, very special guest, someone who I personally feel quite privileged to have a conversation with. Her name is Nirupama Subramaniam. Nirupama Subramaniam brings a rare depth to any conversation on leadership and empathy. She has written 4 thought-provoking books, 2 of which are Powerful and Nurturing Quotient, which we will unpack during the conversation today. Nirupama is a seasoned leadership development facilitator, executive coach, and a TEDx speaker. What is wonderful about what she brings to the table is that she bridges inner work with organizational impact. Beyond boardrooms and coaching rooms, her empathy extends to a family-run non-profit organization which helps and supports underserved girls. Across her writing, practice, and social work, Nirupama invites leaders to rethink power, nurturing human potential, and lead with consciousness and courage. Hello Nirupama, welcome, and thank you so much for making this journey from Gurgaon. I cannot tell you how privileged I feel that you agreed to be part of the podcast.
Thank you so much, Vidya. Thank you for having me here. So glad it worked out, and I find this whole topic and idea of conversation around empathy very fascinating. So very happy to be here.
Thank you. So I'm going to jump into my first question, which is about your fantastic book, Powerful. And, in that you've explored the different archetypes for women. And what I really liked is that the archetypes is about the internal lens.
Yes.
And what are the internal patterns and one's relationship with power. And if you could share with those who've probably not read your book, what it is about and what led you to explore this topic.
Yes, thank you. So this is, of course, something very close to my heart. I'm always happy to share. So this book is called Powerful, The Indian Woman's Guide to Unlocking Her Full Potential. And in fact, in the book itself, I talk about the journey of how I came to write the book. And it's from 2 lenses. One, a very personal lens of being a woman in India, a wife, a mother, a daughter, daughter-in-law, working professional, what my journey has been over the last 50 plus years. And I drew from my own experiences. Second, as a professional, as a leadership development coach and a facilitator who works with both men and women, I saw a few things that were quite different. Firstly, very few women in positions of power. Right? So if you look at data itself, we have barely 10% of women who are CEOs, very few women who've been political leaders as well. And despite the fact that we do have a reservation for women, in the parliament, at the local level, there are very few women who've actually claimed that power and they are using it. Whereas on the other hand, we say we want more women to be a part of the workforce. Women will add $3 trillion to the economy. Then the third aspect is violence and crimes against women are increasing. They more are being reported, acid attacks, they're not stopping as well. So from a professional lens and a more macro lens, I saw that even as women were rising and trying to claim power, there was also a backlash that was happening.
Right.
And I wanted to explore why is this happening. And my own work is about women claiming their power to become effective leaders in any aspect, right? Whether it could be leaders at the home as an entrepreneur, but mostly my work is in corporate India, women at the workforce. So when I was coaching, I saw some patterns which were different.
Okay.
Men rarely spoke about guilt. Women were talking about how guilty they felt leaving their children, not being present for the family. Men, interestingly, often, and research shows this, tend to overestimate their skills and capabilities, and women tend to underestimate them.
Yes,
So I heard very confident, smart women feeling unsure, expressing a lot of self-doubt. And the third aspect, which was different, is owning ambition. A lot of women were very proud to say, I'm not really ambitious. I don't really want to be CEO. I'm okay, I'll just do my work. But deep down, they really wanted to be significant and powerful.
Right.
So because of these patterns, I started seeing that the traditional modes and models, which are very, which are really there from a male lens, don't work for women.
Okay.
We need something different. We need a different language, and we need a template for leadership that is not male. Because very often when you say leader, you think of somebody who's aggressive, very rational, logical, decisive, leading from the front. But that is not the kind of leadership that's working today.
Right.
You can't be a general marshalling the troops to deliver numbers. It just doesn't work.
Yeah.
So all of these aspects, plus my own innate curiosity, passion for reading and watching a lot of movies, all came together.
Nice.
That resulted in Powerful, where the book is about a model that I created called the 6 Feminine Powers model.
Right.
And I intentionally use the word power because we don't have too much of it. And there's a very beautiful quotation I read when I was researching the book. It's by Alice Walker. She says, "The only way people give up power is by believing they don't have any."
Oh, wow. Wow, that is so
Yes.
amazing.
And so it's not that women don't have powers, but we've probably given it up by believing we don't have any.
Right.
And this book is a call, and now I would say it's a movement for women to realize they have all the powers they need, and they just need to evoke it and use it and channel it in the appropriate way. And this model of 6 feminine powers, which you said, I have given it Indian names.
Yes.
Call it the Kanya, Veera, Apsara, Rani, Ma, and Rishika, is a doorway for women to understand and claim their inner power so that they can have power in the outside world.
That's fantastic. And I think what I liked most is the name itself, Power,
Yeah.
because that conventionally is very male.
Exactly.
And how do you kind of, create a framework for women around
Women.
power?
Absolutely, right? And in India, we have the Shakti. Shakti itself means power. And we all pray to, Shakti, the feminine goddess energy. But we don't see it too much in our daily lives.
Right.
So based on that came the book, and then after the book I have an assessment tool,
Right.
the Powerful Life Assessment, which
Yes.
every woman can take the test and find out her unique power profile.
Right.
Because we're not just one power, we have a combination of the 6, and then I've built it out into a leadership program, a certification program. So we have about 25 women who are certified. And my dream is for women to take this to other women who don't
fantastic.
have power and make
Yeah.
this into a movement. So close to 5,000 women have taken the test. We would have impacted about 10,000 women over the last 4 years through workshops, seminars, talks. And the results have been very, very encouraging.
It's great. So these 25 women that have been trained and certified would be able to do the coaching that you would do.
Exactly.
Oh,
exactly.
nice.
So the whole idea is not to just keep it with me, but to empower other women who also want to support women in their practice to use this. So
Okay.
they can coach, they can help other women understand themselves through the tool. They can do sessions, group sessions, and many women have done that. And
Could you give us a practical example of someone that you might have coached?
Yes.
And how, realizing her power pattern and realizing which archetype she is has impacted her positively, professionally, and personally.
yes, I mean, lots of fascinating stories, but I'll share one case which is also a common one where I've seen this in other women. So this was a woman I was coaching about a couple of years back, and from
Okay.
her profile I saw she had a strong Rani and a Ma, right?
Okay.
So very strong focus on being organized and structured, but also wanting to do things for other people.
So Rani is about being organized and structured.
Yes, the Rani is the what we call the queen energy, which is stable, composed, execution based. A woman who likes and wants control, stability, predictability. and also creates that around her.
Right.
And the Ma is the nurturing caregiver,
Yes.
is about, supporting other people, helping others, putting others' needs before your own, being empathetic, nurturing, caring, thoughtful.
Okay.
So, in fact, this is a very typical profile. In fact, in our research so far across women in corporate India, we found the Rani and Ma were the top two powers.
Oh, really?
That-
Actually, that was going to be one of my questions later.
that especially
that's
women in
interesting
corporate
to know.
India.
Oh, wow.
We found that these were the top two powers that they displayed. So, which is why I thought this case was, almost like a textbook case, if I
Okay.
could say that.
Yeah.
And she was at a mid-management level in a typical large consulting organization. And obviously, her aspiration was to move ahead.
Okay.
But she found she was getting stuck somewhere. And the initial conversations were actually around, I'm not very ambitious. I just want to do a good job. Of course, I do want to grow in my career, but not at the cost of doing some of the things that, I don't do. Like what? Like talking about my work, sharing my achievements, this networking thing, which a lot of women are averse to. And obviously, I found that her Veera, which is the warrior energy, and Apsara, which is the charming influencer energy, were on the lower side. And we work with a very interesting concept called the shadow.
Okay.
Jung also talks about it. A shadow is a part of ourselves which we don't own, which we don't claim, and in fact, which we repress because we don't like it.
Ah.
So, interestingly, not just her, but for a lot of women, including me, my Apsara energy is also low. We all don't like to see ourselves as this pushy woman who puts herself out there and, talks about herself and shows off, because modesty and humility has always been rewarded for
Celebrated,
women
yes.
and celebrated as a virtuous quality.
Yes.
But in the corporate world, when you want to get ahead and you're surrounded by competitive male colleagues, it's not going to help you. So it was really about helping her see that pattern,
Right.
not as something to be shunned, but as something that she can also use
Okay.
in order to meet her goals and aspirations. So the first question was, do you really want to grow in your career?
Right.
Do you want to reach a senior level? Because if you do, you can have a much greater impact. And that's the thing I find with a lot of women, that we are, and including me, we are content to dream small and to act small because there is so much of a load on us already, and we're not rewarded for being ambitious.
Yes.
Because the pursuit of a large audacious goal requires us to demonstrate a lot of capabilities and behaviors which we are not comfortable with.
Right.
So once she became aware that she needs the Apsara and she can balance the Apsara energy with her Rani as well as her Ma, she doesn't have to go all out there and, be this brazen woman, as she said it. But she could easily channelize it by doing certain simple things, by looking at it as a skill she needs to acquire.
Okay.
Right? So we actually came to that very interesting belief to say that it is my responsibility to my work to showcase it to the outside world. Because the Ranis are very responsible. They feel a strong sense of responsibility.
Right.
And we can tap into that and say, you do a great job, but it's not serving the world if you don't show people that you're doing it.
Right.
Then she
So
started
just a
evoking her
question here.
Apsara more. Yeah.
Everyone has all the energies?
Yes, everyone has all. So
Okay.
we look at it at 3 levels. The ones energy we use more and are comfortable with are what I call the dominant powers.
Right.
Right. So I mostly use this. Like, I'm a dominant Rishika. Everybody will say it's absolutely right.
Okay.
And I'm curious. I like information, knowledge. Writing a book is a very exciting thing for me. And my goal in 2025 was to read 36 books, which I did very
Wow,
happily.
you
as well.
actually
Then
read 36
I read
books?
36 books and I
Wow.
posted about it. So I have a list on LinkedIn with the 36
Okay.
books I read. I would have read a couple more, but then I guess I didn't write about it. So that comes easily and naturally to me. So we have dominant powers, which are easy, natural, our go-to powers. Then
got
we
it.
have situational powers, which is typically in the moderate range. I don't identify with it, but I can use it as and when required. Then we have latent powers. We call them latent because we have them, but we haven't used it much. So imagine you have a toolbox with 6 tools.
Right.
6 different tools, but you're used to only couple of them because
Correct.
your circumstances call for that. You are more comfortable with that. So whenever I see a situation, I go to my favorite tools.
Right.
Sometimes I use a couple of others, but not always. And there could be 1 or 2 which I don't pick up at all, but I still have.
Right.
So if I use something 7 out of 10 times, there is something I use only once or twice. So that is what I call latent.
Got it.
By understanding your full power profile, you will understand what are your strengths, what are also your power blocks, what come in the way. Right? So for this leader, her power block came from her inability to use her Apsara tool
Right.
to talk about and showcase her achievements, to take up public speaking experiences. So she was always like, people have asked me to come and talk about this, but I've said, no, I don't want to be there. Right? The spotlight is scary for women
Right.
sometimes.
Yeah.
So by realizing that she needs to use this tool if she wants to meet her goals, and using this tool doesn't make her a bad person,
Right.
because there's a lot of conditioning around these powers.
Absolutely.
And she has the choice to use it in a way that makes sense for her. She was able to access that, and she actually went and asked for the promotion, which she had never done earlier. Right? She actually said, I will have a conversation and I will tell my seniors, these are the things that I have done.
That is really a huge change.
That is.
Because
that
asking
is.
for a promotion is not something...
It's not something that comes easily.
Does not come easily.
Yeah.
And it's also that fear of how you're going to be viewed when you ask for
Absolutely,
it. You're going to be
yes.
viewed as very ambitious, pushy,
Pushy.
competitive.
Completely.
There's just so many negative associations with you saying that I deserve it and I want to grow.
Absolutely. Right. And a lot of women, and in fact, research shows that don't apply for a promotion unless they feel they're 100% ready. Men do it when they feel they're even 50 to 60% capable and ready for it. You'll put your hand up and say, I will learn.
Yeah.
Women say, I have to make sure that moment I get it, I am worthy of it, and I do
Absolutely.
everything. And that actually holds us back. And I've
Yeah.
seen so many patterns in my own life where I've said, no, I will learn it, I will master it, then I will go and do this workshop, as simple as that. So having a language, Vidya, I think makes a big difference. Language is power, right? When you keep saying mankind, you believe that default human is man, that itself removes power from you.
Right.
You say this doesn't apply to me. I don't see myself. In fact, the default language for a leader is always he. Yeah, he who is a leader, he who does this, he who does that.
Absolutely.
So why not she as a leader?
Yeah.
I've started using that very consciously when I do workshops, to bring the word she. When I write cases for my programs, I always make a woman the manager and not always the subordinate.
Right.
So changing language, changing the way we talk helps to change the way we think. And when we change the way we think and talk, it helps us to change the way we behave and show up in the world.
Wow. I really, really think that in itself is a very powerful tool.
Yes,
Because
it's to
I,
believe in that.
now that you bring it to my notice, I don't think I ever thought of it as the language itself. It's true when you say mankind, when you think of a leader, it's usually a man that comes to your mind. When you think of a CEO, it's
Yes.
usually a male that
It's
you
usually a
think
male,
of.
absolutely. So I do unconscious bias workshops as well. I do
Okay.
a lot of work in inclusion, and we have this interesting story about the surgeon, right?
Yes.
Right. Like, a man and his son are going on an accident, and the man dies, and the surgeon, the boy is got to the hospital. The surgeon comes and says, I can't operate on this boy. He is my son. How did this happen? And
Yeah.
everybody's actually quite befuddled for some time, and I've had answers which come as maybe it's a ghost, maybe it's a priest, maybe it's a stepfather, before they reach the conclusion that, hey, the surgeon could be his mother.
Exactly.
Right?
yeah.
So surgeon and so many of these things, right?
Yeah.
Always so coded as male that we have to shift the language to
Totally.
make a shift
Yeah,
in our
yeah,
thinking.
I just wanted to understand, kind of tying back into the empathy quotient
Yes.
part of it, that self-awareness and empathy, what is the connection? Because is it true that people who are more self-aware and have power within themselves are the ones that will be more empathetic.
Absolutely. Right? And there is research as well. So if you look at Daniel Goleman, who's done a lot of work in emotional intelligence, he says actually there are two aspects, which is self-awareness, self-regulation, and then awareness of others and regulation of others. So being emotionally intelligent, which includes the ability to demonstrate empathy, starts with self-awareness.
Right.
Right? You can't serve from an empty vessel. So if you're not confident and secure in yourself and connected and present within, it's difficult to tune into another person's thoughts and feelings because you're so consumed by me and my needs and my ambition and my desire and not aware of that. It's difficult to be empathetic. So for example, when a team member comes and says, I'm not able to come to work tomorrow because of XYZ reason, I tune out the moment she says, I'm not able to work tomorrow. I'm like, what about this deliverable? What is going to happen? How do you get this done? And then my mind has already gone there and I won't even ask why, what's happened.
Thank you. I thought I was the only one who did that.
It happens to all of us.
Yeah.
Right? Then I have to say, okay, I'm concerned about obviously myself and I'm churned and I am being reactive. I can't respond to her with empathy if that is the case. So, I actually teach empathy in workshops.
Wow.
Every leadership development workshop has a session on listening and empathy as a part of listening. And people find it so difficult to empathize. So actually do a fun exercise where we look at what should be your response to something like this. And mostly people are doing 4 other things rather than demonstrating empathy, rather than empathize. So we either minimize, say, oh, that's nothing, it's okay. Or we maximize and say, that's terrible. I know, how do you do it? Or the thing we love to do is advice. So what you should do is, this. If you're feeling stressed and overwhelmed, meditate, take deep breaths.
But isn't that empathizing? You're kind of
That is
helping
not.
them give a solution.
That is actually a common misconception
Okay.
about empathy. So you can help them, but first you need to show empathy rather than jump into advice.
Got it.
So if somebody is in an emotional state, they're not ready to receive advice. And I see that with my daughter, right, who comes and says, I'm feeling stressed, confused, I don't know what to do with my life. If I say, you know what, why don't you take a piece of paper and write down all the important things, she's not in the frame of mind to take a piece of paper and write down.
Yeah.
Maybe later. But first you want to hear, yeah, I hear you. From where you are, it can be confusing at your stage. That is empathy. So we usually move to minimize, maximize, advise, or analyze, which is also what we love to do. I think you're feeling that because of this. So we tend to give our input out of a desire to help. We are ready to offer a solution, but we need to see, is the other person in a state to receive it?
Got it. Yeah.
Right? And sometimes they need to hear, relax, everything will be fine. Sometimes that can be very irritating when they are completely not relaxed.
Yeah.
So, to come back to your question, I have to be aware of who I am, what are my needs, and then I can move to demonstrating real empathy with the other person.
Got it. Also, because empathy a lot of the times, especially in the context of leadership,
Yes.
is looked at a very motherly, very self-sacrificing almost.
Yeah.
And which is why I wanted to bring up this topic, that it's about when you're powerful within,
Yes.
when you're self-aware, when you're in a good space is when you can actually be empathetic.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Otherwise, you're too consumed by your own needs, worries, concerns, desires to truly be there for the other person.
True.
So even if I know empathy intellectually, which I do, because I've studied empathy, I teach empathy, it's not always easy for me to practice it in real life. And then I have to recalibrate, I have to take that pause, I have to calm myself down internally so that I can be there for the other person.
So the tools is to recalibrate, take a pause,
Take a
and calm
pause.
yourself down.
Yeah, and then really listen.
listen.
Listen with
Right.
openness, with curiosity. And empathy is not any one thing, right? And so actually psychologists have said there are 3 types of empathy.
Oh, okay. Please tell us
okay.
about that. Yes.
So there is cognitive empathy,
Okay.
which is I understand what you're thinking, or I understand why you might have that perspective. So if you say you are feeling confused, well, I can understand why you might be feeling confused because there are so many options in front of you. From where you are, this thing can seem confusing. So that is what we call cognitive empathy, which is from the mind perspective. Then there is emotional empathy,
Okay.
which is, I feel for you.
Which is the most obvious one.
Which is the most obvious
Which
one.
is what we actually think of when we think of
actually
empathy.
think. Yeah, I understand.
Okay.
I can understand your feeling. I've been there, and if I were faced with a lot of options, it can be confusing. So I feel you, right? That is emotional empathy. And the third one is compassionate empathy,
Okay.
which is I want to help you. I really want to serve and support you. And often that is kind of mixed or confused with sympathy, which is I feel sorry for you,
Correct.
but I may not be ready to help you fully. Right? I get down and feel sorry with you, but compassionate empathy is I really want to help you. Right? And
And what is the reference to this? Where is this from? These 3 kinds of empathy?
so this is from work of many psychologists. Daniel
Okay.
Goleman also speaks about these 3 kinds of empathy. He calls it empathic concern instead of compassionate empathy. But almost all researchers who worked with empathy have found that these are the 3 common types of empathy.
Oh,
And you
fantastic.
could be very good at one, but you may not always have access to all 3.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So
can-
I feel
can
as a
understand
Rishika,
that.
I'm fairly good at cognitive empathy. So I can say, as a coach, I can understand, I can see why you're coming from that. I can see why you feel that way. Right? And you hold an opinion, especially challenging when you hold an opinion which is very different from mine.
But does cognitive empathy also help you with be very good at when you're debating with someone?
Yes.
Or when you're in a meeting and someone just strongly opposes your view?
Absolutely.
You don't get upset.
You don't get upset. Instead, you might move to, that's interesting. Why do you feel that way?
Nice.
Where is this coming from? And then I can really understand. I understand this is where it's coming from. Right? And it happened to me with a client who really wanted to know all the details of a program I was going to deliver, and I was getting irritated. Right? Like, don't you trust me?
Yeah.
I mean, I know it's the first time we're working together, but I have so much experience. I've done a great job. You've got
Yeah.
all the you collected references, and you're giving me this project because you trust me, and now you want me to tell you what I'm going to do minute by minute, and I was getting very irritated. But then I had to pause and see, hey, where is she coming from? She's really keen to do a good job. She's a little junior. She's new to the organization. She doesn't want to mess up. And this is who she is. This is her way of working. Her need is for safety and security. And she wants to make sure that everything is in place. And when I bring that level and say, I can understand, having this detailed plan is going to make it easier for both of us.
Correct.
It's going to take a little extra work from me. It's different from my approach, but it's okay. I understand where you're coming from.
Nice.
And then can we have a conversation where it's not about you're wrong and I'm right and you don't trust me
Correct.
and I'm so great, but how do we make this work in a way that serves both of us? That I'm not going to give you minute by minute, but I'll give you a broad outline and let's have a conversation and let me understand what your concerns truly are.
Right.
So
That's fantastic. And that kind of helps me segue into this offline chat that we were having.
yes.
About how women leaders, or not just women leaders, across the board, women don't find it very easy to be empathetic to each other, especially when the relationship is that of a subordinate and a manager. And you had brought up this insightful theory about the minority psychology. So could you share a little more
Yeah.
about that?
Yeah, this is interesting, and it came from some study I was doing when I was writing my book,
Okay.
Powerful, that there is something called a queen bee syndrome. Not sure how valid it is now, but there has been research that women in positions of power treat other women more harshly. And that led me to validate it through a lot of conversations with women and with men also. And I noticed a particular pattern that people, not just women, but typically people who've been deprived of power, any minority which has not had power, they behave in a particular way when they come into power. Right? And I'll give you a verbatim example that made me curious about this. And I said, okay, there is a thing. So there was a very senior woman leader who I was talking to, and she just made a comment about these Gen Zs, and she said, I really worked hard. I really struggled. It wasn't easy for me. I was working till the last day of my pregnancy. I left office and then I went to the hospital and gave birth to my child. And I was back within 3 months. These young girls these days, they just want it easy. They want leaves, when they are feeling sick. They want me time. They want period leaves. How ridiculous is that?
Yeah.
Right? And I noticed this narrative, not just, of course, women, because women who are in positions of power today at a senior level have had to work hard. They've had to battle biases. They've had to work in a system that was probably not as friendly or conducive. They had to struggle to come to the top. Probably they didn't get family support either. So when they've gone through all of this struggle, which they see it as a legitimate struggle to come to power, they find it difficult to have empathy with people who have it relatively easier. Right? And we hear our parents also
So is
saying
that like
this.
suppressed anger of the suffering that you've gone through?
May not be I don't know. It may not be suppressed. It's a very righteous indignation kind of a thing. I've done this with my daughter also when she came and said, no, I'm working too hard. My boss is being tough. And my instinctive mental reaction was suck it up. We've all been there, right? You young kids, you really want it easy. You have this glorious image of that you'll waltz into your job and everything will be roses all the way. That's not going to happen. So that comes from a deeply personal experience that you've gone through. And the mistake we often make is that my personal experience is universal. And therefore, if I struggle, you should also struggle.
Right.
My journey is the more legitimate journey. That sometimes comes in the way of empathy.
Since you like to look at it from the Indian context.
Yes.
To me, this is reminding me of the Saas Bhi Kabhi Bahu Thi complex that we see.
Yes. Yes. So in fact, in my book Powerful, I speak about 4 strategies that keep women from their power. But these 4 strategies also work for any minority group. Call it the deter, diminish, decorate, and divide.
Okay.
Right. So deter is a strategy of instilling fear and hesitation, which is like saying, don't do this, don't do this. I was not allowed to party till midnight. How can you? So you can't. So that's a deter strategy. Diminish is a strategy where you make a person feel small. You say, you can't do this. You're only a woman, or you're a little, or you're too young. You can't do this. Decorate is a strategy where we impose impossibly high standards and get rewarded for that. So in this Saas Bhi Bahu Thi, as a Bahu, I was expected to be dutiful, subservient, sacrificing, and I got rewarded for that. And that is also a very addictive reward because I get a good name. I get a good name if I am self-sacrificing, obedient and submissive. So I expect you also to be the same. And any other behavior is deviant. So that's the decorate. And the 4th one is the divide, where people in the group judge each other like the queen bee syndrome and don't support each other in their quest for power, because power is really limited and hard won.
Right.
And it means in my mind, if I have power, you can't have power as well. So in every workshop I do, women themselves say, yes, women tend to judge each other more harshly. So the Saas who's had a bad time of it and struggled and has been rewarded for being dutiful, subservient, finds it difficult, therefore, to accept or allow any other kind of behavior from her daughter-in-law because she was subject to something different.
You touched upon something fantastic. By definition, when one thinks of power, it feels like if there are 2 of us, if I have power, then you can't. If you have power, then I can't.
Exactly.
Because you always think only one person can have that power.
Absolutely.
in context to the archetypes that you've spoken about,
Yes.
how do these two sit
Yeah.
together?
Yeah, firstly, I think it's important to understand power fully. We are talking about different kinds of power. Positional power is limited. Only one person can be the prime minister. Right? Only one person can be the CEO. But if I, as an individual, rely only on positional power, then I am nothing when that position gets taken away.
Yes.
I lose the next elections. The board replaces me with somebody else. I get fired from my managerial job. Then I'm left with nothing.
Right.
So we very often mistake positional power for the true power.
Okay.
The other kind of power is ascriptive power, which I get by virtue of belonging to a particular group.
Okay.
As a man, I automatically get power, especially in our context, just by being a man.
Yes.
If I'm rich, I am more powerful. If I'm white, I am more powerful. Right? So that is ascriptive power, which is given to you by through status. You may not have worked for it, but by virtue of belonging to a particular group, you get ascriptive power. The third is truly inner power, or what I call personal power,
Got it. Yeah.
which you have because of your strengths, skills, capabilities, values, your presence. You've demonstrated who you really are. And that is not something anybody can take away from you. And that is unlimited.
Right.
Right? So if you truly believe you are powerful, that means you are aware of your personal power and inner power, which is not dependent upon somebody else saying, oh, wow, you have these designations or you are this.
Right.
It can get taken away. And when you're truly in your personal power, you will not feel threatened by other people
Right.
as well.
Yeah.
Because you are confident. I'm not diminished by you. I'm not comparing myself to you and saying, oh, look, she is CEO, I'm not. Or she has this, I don't have.
Yeah.
I'm comfortable with who I am. I have belief in my skills and capabilities. And therefore, I'm not threatened by somebody else.
Right.
But systems thrive on pitting people against each other.
Absolutely.
And fighting for power, which is why you have organizational politics and
Yes.
politics as well, because we believe power is limited. So, after I left my full-time job, which is a very long time ago, I really don't have positional power. Which is, I'm not the CEO of any large organization. I don't have a big brand name, nor am I rich and famous enough to command that kind of power. But I am working on my personal power. And I won't say I'm fully there, but I realize if I work on my personal power, these trappings of power don't matter so much.
So I really like what you said, because it really brings to light that power is not something that is given to you.
Yes.
It is what you bring from within yourself to the situation, to the organization, to the home, or to anything. for that
Absolutely.
matter.
And power
Yeah.
could be given to you, right? You might be given a position, but how do you handle that? How do you hold that power? Really depends upon you.
Right.
Do you abuse your position? That's why they say, absolute power corrupts absolutely. It can totally go to your head and make you do all kinds of things. It's a very heady feeling.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
but how do you handle that?
I'd like to segue into the latest book,
Yes.
right? Which is Nurturing Quotient. Again, what I loved about it is that, when you think of leadership, there are so many books on how the leader should behave, what the leader should be doing for the people. And I like that you've explored the other angle, where you've said, how about, talking about how the leader should nurture themselves.
Yes.
So could you tell me, one, what gave birth to the idea of the book? And two, what was your journey like talking to so many leaders?
Yeah. So this is The Nurturing Quotient is a book that just came out this year in July. I've co-authored it with my husband, Rajesh Ramakrishnan. So Rajesh has been a corporate professional for 30 years. He was leading a company, and he brings in that perspective, from being a practicing leader. And I had the perspective of a leadership development coach and a consultant, and I've been coaching for the last 20 years. And it was actually a dinner table conversation where we were exchanging notes, and he was talking about something that happened at work and some challenges. I was talking about a workshop that I had done and, what I felt. And we both realized that the old ways of working, the command and control approach was no
Right.
longer working. And as individuals, we have a lot of interests outside of our core work.
Right.
Like Rajesh has always been passionate about fitness, about yoga. He goes on treks. He's a very passionate amateur photographer. I'm a writer. My first 2 books were novels, actually. I love writing fiction. And, I also have done travel writing. I started running recently, and I'm always learning something new. And these other things feed into our work
Right.
as well. In fact, it makes us better professionals. So that was the starting point. And we said, okay, we all had theories, but let's make this practical and see whether it really works. So our initial idea was to speak to about 20-25 leaders.
Okay.
But as we started speaking to these people, we really enjoyed the conversations. And then one person said, you should speak to so-and-so. He's a very nurturing leader. She is amazing. She will have something to contribute. So we finally have about 117 people
Wow.
who are all leaders in their own way. Many are CEOs of companies, very large organizations like Nestle, like Levers, Microsoft. But also, we have a couple of people from the army. We have people from outside India. We have leaders of non-profit. So we have people like Ashish Dhawan and Pramod Sinha, who run large educational institutions and non-profits as well. So we got a nice, mixed bag.
Well-rounded perspective.
Well-rounded, about 35 women as well.
Oh, fantastic.
And so we asked them, what are the challenges they're facing? Why is nurturing important? And the how of it. How do they nurture themselves? How do they nurture others? Then using that, our own lived experience, secondary research, we have actually compiled a list of best practices and put in some frameworks for nurturing self, which is along the 4 domains of physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual.
Okay.
Body, mind, heart, and soul.
Right.
How important that is, and how are some simple ways in which you can do it.
Right.
And nurturing others, which is around the 4 behaviors we call MILE: mentoring and coaching others, inspiring, listening, and empowering.
Okay.
And to do this, you need to have 4 critical qualities. And of course, which we call hope. Humility.
That was the framework which
Yes.
connects to empathy, right?
Absolutely.
Hope. Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Which is humility. I don't know everything and I'm open to, so learning, which leads to, humility leads to openness. Which is, I'm open, I'm curious, I want to learn, both for myself and others.
Right.
Then the most underrated leadership quality, patience.
Yes.
Because nurturing doesn't happen in a day, right? You can't inject steroids into a plant or a child and say, grow up. It requires patience. The 4th E is empathy.
Oh, right.
And empathy, which is all kinds of empathy for others. And interestingly, empathy creates 2 very important things, which is why I'm very excited about your podcast. Connection and creativity.
Okay, connections I can understand.
Yeah.
Why creativity?
So if you look at design thinking, right, which is a very well understood and legitimate framework for creativity,
Okay.
one of the first steps to design something is to have empathy. Right? You have to observe the world around you, see a
Correct.
problem,
Yeah.
feel for that problem, saying, I want to fix this. I want to create something that will solve this problem.
Right.
And I can't do it if I don't feel.
Right. Right.
And then you move on to creating, innovating, designing something that will solve a problem. So I don't mean creativity in the terms of performative creativity,
Right.
like, a painter or
But
somebody.
from problem-solving
but
perspective.
from a innovation.
Yeah.
Right? More than
Innovation,
creativity,
problem-solving.
innovation.
Yeah.
Problem solving happens when I feel, right? So I see, I feel, then I go into creating,
Creative.
prototyping, and coming up with a design.
Absolutely.
And a very good example is this movie, Padman.
Yeah.
Right? And if you've seen that, I may not have gone through the same things that a woman does, but I see my wife, I see her suffer. I see plenty of young girls suffering for that, and I feel for them. And I don't want to be in that place. And therefore, that leads me to create something or
Yeah.
innovate something that will help to solve your problem. So empathy is not a passive, touchy-feely kind of an emotion or a skill. It's a very powerful quality that leads to innovation, creativity, of course, connection and belonging, but also leads to change.
Fantastic. Thank you for bringing that perspective in,
Yeah.
because when you think of empathy, connection becomes the obvious extension.
Yes.
But even I had forgotten that design thinking starts with empathy.
Starts with empathy,
And
yeah.
therefore, empathy leads to problem solving, innovation. And
Yes.
thank you so much. Yeah. Okay, so that completes my, all the questions that I had for you. But I could talk to you all day. But I do
it's a
realize I have to
fascinating
let
topic.
you
No,
go.
No, I
at
love
some
this.
point.
Yeah, I'm really enjoying this.
We brought in some time ago was to make this fun. We call it the rapid fire.
Oh my, okay. I don't have a buzzer, which is good.
So I have some questions for you, and I don't think too much.
Okay.
Just answer quickly, right? What would you say to someone that believes power and empathy sit on opposite ends of the spectrum?
I would say empathy is a superpower and you should develop it. And the more powerful you are, the more empathetic you can be.
Fantastic. Thank you. What's the one question leaders should ask themselves more often but don't?
There's a whole list. But one question that I found very interesting, and somebody asked me this during a session, was this, that when you're doing what you're doing, what are you really doing?
Could you repeat that?
When you're doing what you are doing, what are you really doing? Which for my mind is really the self-awareness question. Right? When I am, what are my needs and motivations, and am I being authentic?
Nice. I really like that. I'm going to use that.
I try to keep using that for myself.
What quality or qualities in women leaders do you really admire?
I think a lot of qualities. And this may not be true only for women leaders, but I do see it a lot in women leaders, is the ability to balance polarities. Right? And I also talk about this in the book, The Nurturing Quotient, that leadership is about the ability to manage seemingly conflicting needs and motivations. For example, ambition and compassion, self-orientation and other orientation. Women leaders have had to develop and therefore have the ability to do this beautiful dance between these polarities. That I have to be confident and I have to be caring.
I love that. That is really, really insightful. Thank you. 2 practical tips for anyone to strengthen their empathy muscle.
I would say the first practical skill is the skill of deep listening.
Okay.
And I say deep listening, which is going beyond just the superficial facts, but really listening to feelings and needs. And the other skill is powerful questions.
Oh, wow.
Asking powerful questions helps you to build cognitive empathy, helps you to build emotional empathy, because you can understand also the real feeling. Right? Sometimes a hurt shows up as anger. Right? A hurt child will throw things around, but really they're feeling hurt, they're feeling sad. And compassionate empathy, you know what kind of help they want. So if you listen deeply and ask powerful questions, I think not only empathy, but you can really develop the art of powerful connections and conversations.
Great. Thank you. On that note, I really want to thank you. It's been such an insightful conversation and it's been packed with tips. I hope you guys have enjoyed it as much as I've enjoyed this conversation, and I'm sure people have taken a lot back.
Thank you, Vidya. Thank you for having me. Really enjoyed our conversation, and thank you for your listening and asking all these powerful questions as well.
Thank you.